Few performances have been mythologized like Christian Bale's in American Psycho. Word is he was so unsettling the other actors didn't have to act scared, was so cold on set some thought he actually went nuts, and as legend has it, could sweat on command.
While many actors can cry on cue, it turns out that Christian Bale can sweat on cue.
He's just a legend. After revisiting the film, and yeah, it's still so funny, I was inspired to crack open the book again, and this time I noticed something that made me realize the satire is more sophisticated than I initially thought. The book's first epigraph, a quote from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. I didn't think much of it at first, but after reading a critic's claim that it takes on deep and Dostoevskian themes, I pondered on it a bit more and came upon a whole new appreciation for American Psycho. This novella, one of my favorites, is a psychological examination of a bizarre figure who embodies a scathing critique of a strand of utopian thought popular in Dostoevsky's time. American Psycho follows the same formula, except Patrick Bateman represents a critique of a different kind of, well, pseudo-utopian thought, Reaganism.
He presents himself as this harmless old codger, but inside.
Let's dive in.
I'm looking for a man in finance. Trust fund. 6'5", blue eyes. Finance.
But first, a quick recap. American Psycho follows Patrick Bateman, a Wall Street exec who loves to work out, grub at fancy restaurants, mechanically pontificate about music, oh yeah, and murder people, including his coworker Paul Allen, for the sin of scoring a superior restaurant reservation. Bateman's killing spree escalates to include sex workers, models, and even friends. A detective seems to be closing in, but Patrick is conveniently saved by the indistinguishability of all the finance bros, as someone remembers him at a gathering the night of Paul Allen's disappearance. As Bateman's rampage gets more extreme, the line between reality and his warped perspective begins to blur. After a dramatic shootout with the cops, Patrick phones his lawyer in a paranoid frenzy and confesses to everything. But when he later confronts the lawyer in person, the lawyer laughs it off and insists that Paul Allen is still alive, leaving Bateman confused with only the realization that nothing has changed. The end. Okay, so what does a dark comedy about shallow yuppies have to do with a 160-year-old Russian novella? Notes from Underground depicts the musings of a deeply cynical and alienated narrator who we'll just call the Underground Man. The first half is basically a philosophical monologue in which he bitterly criticizes an emerging strain of modern thought called rationalist utopianism. However, even though he's critical of this trendy ideology, it's apparent that he's also internalized its tenets to such a degree that it's made him weird. This is the key to Dostoevsky's influence on Pat Bateman. Just as the Underground Man internalizes rationalist utopianism to the point of derangement, Bateman internalizes neoliberal Reaganism to similarly unhinged results. Let's break it down. So what does rationalist utopianism mean? In 1863, Russian philosopher Nikolai Chernyshevsky published What is to be Done, a novel depicting a future where scientifically designed social systems would eliminate human suffering and bring about utopia. This is what Dostoevsky was criticizing, the idea that humanity could, through Enlightenment reason, construct the perfect social order that churns out perfect humans. Fast forward to the 80s when what can be sardonically painted as a utopian ideal was being championed, Reaganism, which heralded the free market as the supreme system, one that guarantees widespread prosperity, enabling humanity to realize the perfect timeline. Patrick Bateman is a caricature of the idealized neoliberal subject, the perfect 80s yuppie. Yuppies, or young urban professionals, were fitness-obsessed, brand-conscious, luxury-oriented, and lived by a work-hard, play-hard mindset. The idea was, if you align yourself with the values of the market, you become the person with the best values. Thing is, as the movie depicts, leaning too hard into these values just leads to the elimination of values altogether. For example, Bateman's morning routine. At the beginning, he narrates his meticulous skincare and fitness regimen.
In the shower, I use a water-activated gel cleanser, then moisturizer, then an anti-aging eye balm followed by a final moisturizing protective lotion.
He describes each product and step with clinical precision, presenting himself as the completely optimized specimen. Problem is, beneath the physical, there's nothing.
I simply am not there.
He goes to the swankiest restaurants, but his supposed valuing of top quality food collapses on itself, as the dishes he and his friends order are absurd and gross.
Mud soup and charcoal arugula are outrageous here.
I have swordfish meatloaf with onion marmalade.
The book includes dishes such as sashimi with goat cheese and grilled salmon with raspberry vinegar and guacamole. They're so concerned with having exclusive taste that they end up eating garbage.
You're gonna have the peanut butter soup with smoked duck and mashed squash.
Patrick also has good moral hygiene, not to be confused with having good morals. He stands up against bigotry
No, just cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks.
and rattles off a list of important social causes,
We have to end apartheid for one, and slow down the nuclear arms race.
but it's all a hollow performance. He wears social causes like brand name suits, a purely symbolic act with no concern for enacting change. Patrick does something similar with theater. The arts are the domain of the passions, but when art is just an accessory, a signifier to build your image, it's robbed of any passion.
We'd gone to a new musical called Oh Africa, Brave Africa. It was a laugh riot.
Sexual activity, the most intimate of acts, is similarly robbed of any intimacy. It's just a performance for the cameras. The film paints the Reaganist ideal less as ideal human values and more a parody of the very concept of values. There's a great part in Notes from Underground that similarly shows how over-identifying with an ideology can not only make you weird, but actually contradict the ideology. So, two tenets of rationalist utopianism were freedom and science, but can you even have both? At one point, the Underground Man questions if it makes sense to be mad after getting slapped in the face. If human action can be reduced to science and there's no free will, then the slapper isn't responsible for his slaps. Science is. You can't forgive science because it doesn't have agency, and plus forgiveness implies some kind of moral responsibility, which we've already established is an illusion, so I guess it's best just to not be offended and do nothing. You know, people usually paint Dostoevsky as the Batman of the literary canon, all brooding and tortured, but this stuff is actually pretty funny. And hey, before we move on, I want to tell you about this video sponsor, Raycon's Everyday Earbuds. They're sleek, comfortable, and have great sound quality, all for half the price of the competitors. I use them when I'm walking my dog and commuting on the metro, but they're a lifesaver when it comes to making these videos. To keep myself motivated and creative, I have to change my location, so I'm always posting up seaside or at loud coffee shops, and Raycon's new active noise cancellation feature allows me to stay focused. I can listen to music to keep the writing flow going, or pick up small nuances in sound while editing audio. They've got a 32-hour battery life, and the case supports wireless charging. Not only does the protective cover complement the style of the earbuds, but the case gives 90 minutes of battery and just 10 minutes of charging. Every purchase comes with a 30-day happiness guarantee, so if you need to make a return, it's super easy. So get yourself a pair of Raycon's Everyday Earbuds by going to buyraycon.com/Bauer today to get 20 to 50% off site-wide. That's 20 to 50% off site-wide at buyraycon.com/Bauer. Not only is it a great product, but it's a great way to support the channel. And now, back to the show. Turns out, when you aspire to create the perfect human, you end up losing the human part. Whereas Dostoevsky saw these emerging modes of thought reducing people to cogs in the machine, American Psycho depicts a man who seems more like a robot playing the part of a human poorly.
Come on, Bryce. There are a lot more important problems than Sri Lanka.
Take Patrick's Huey Lewis in the News monologue.
The whole album has a clear, crisp sound and a new sheen of consummate professionalism that really gives the songs a big boost.
Not only is this the most vanilla take ever, but it sounds rehearsed, an imitation of what he thinks sincerity sounds like. Later, he confesses his desire for fundamental needs while pointing a nail gun at Gene's head.
I guess you could say I just want to have a meaningful relationship with someone special.
Not only do his actions not quite match his words, it sounds like a completely detached recitation of an emotion. But it's not only Patrick who's become dehumanized. His treatment of others also lacks humanity. The idea of romantic commitment is a joke. Everybody is constantly cheating on each other.
I'm almost completely indifferent as to whether Evelyn knows I'm having an affair with Courtney Rawlinson.
Other people are reduced to an amalgamation of status signifiers, and he renames, abuses, and ultimately kills prostitutes,
You're Christy. You're to respond only to Christy.
I'm gonna call you Sabrina.
literally consuming and discarding them. A common critique of Reagan-era policies is that eroded social safety nets led to a spike in homelessness and inequality. The term welfare queen was coined to paint poor people, particularly women, as lazy and undeserving of help.
Why don't you get a job? If you're so hungry, why don't you get a job?
In an exaggerated embodiment of this ethos, Bateman murders a homeless man. Since he fell through the cracks of the system, he's free to be disposed with. Of course, the notion that Bateman, by contrast, is self-made is ridiculous, as his dad owns the company.
Your father practically owns the company. You can do anything you like, silly.
Finally, both rationalist utopianism and Reaganism were materialistic.
Don't touch the watch.
Now, Dostoevsky didn't mean this in the sense that people cared too much about stuff, but rather that one could focus only on the material world, ignore spiritual concerns, and call it progress. It's not a far cry from the insistence that our identities can be entirely constructed by material objects.
American Gardens Building, West 81st Street.
Nice. Very nice.
Thanks.
The Yuppies of American Psycho are beyond brand obsessed. There are a bunch of brand name drops in the movie,
Gene, great jacket. Matsuda?
but the number in the book is staggering. Patrick and his coworkers are constantly recognizing celebrities.
Is that Donald Trump's car?
We'll get any Leibovitz.
Is that Reed Robinson over there?
Is that Ivana Trump?
Essentially human brands whose recognition unlocks status by association. People's self-worth is determined by their ability to get a restaurant reservation, their place of work, and the location of their apartment. There's a great moment when Christy, knowing from their first encounter that Patrick likes to be complimented, says,
"This is nicer than your other apartment."
not knowing that this is Paul Allen's apartment,
Oh, it's not that nice.
located next to the Guggenheim. The Underground Man rejected the idea that humans can be satisfied by only reason and material prosperity. He argued that suffering, moral struggle, and higher meaning are essential to the human experience. The world depicted in American Psycho is one so-called utopia, in which spiritual dimensions have been banished, with meaning entirely outsourced to stuff. However, there is a key difference between the two works, well, other than one criticizing conservatism and the other an emerging socialism, but other than that, in Bateman's time, tools exist that amplify ideology's ability to create unprecedented conformity. Throughout the movie, people mistake Bateman for other guys, sometimes Marcus Halberstram, other times David or Mr. Smith.
Hello, Halberstram. Nice tie.
Names are thrown around without any sense of consistency, the idea being that yuppies are so uniform in their obsession with status that they've become interchangeable. Or the famous business card scene. Man, this is so good. All the business cards are basically identical, and yet Bateman has a full-on meltdown when one looks, I guess, classier than his? Here, the satire taps into a prominent post-World War II anxiety known as mass society. Mass society refers to the way alienated populations in the industrial era become homogenized through their reliance on mass media. Germany during World War II marked the dawn of mass society, the love child of broadcasting and herd mentality. According to one historical interpretation, the Third Reich was able to effectively brainwash the population because mass media could facilitate a mass contagion of sentiment. TV and radio showed such potential for manipulation that some suspected it would do the same thing to the post-war populations, but with a different flavor of propaganda: advertising. I mean, if the Germans got brainwashed, why not us? In 1919, department store tycoon Edward Feline said that mass production demands the education of the masses. The masses must learn to behave like human beings in a mass production world. In other words, in order to exist in a mass-produced world, people have to adopt a mass culture that perpetuates production. Patrick Bateman is a cynical personification of the advertising era mass man, a guy who's defined entirely by possessions and appearances, and is indistinguishable from his colleagues, a man who doesn't know how to be much of a human, but sure knows how to consume. In fact, other people exist solely to be consumed, or aka murdered. However, at one point it seems like Patrick is genuinely trying to grasp onto something real, and when he can't, his grip on reality starts to falter. Unlike his Huey Lewis or Phil Collins reviews, toward the end he goes into another monologue about a Whitney Houston song, but his tone is different.
But the greatest love of all is one of the best, most powerful songs ever written.
This time it feels like he's trying to express something authentic, but can't. And I think the ensuing decay of reality with the shootout and whatnot is linked to the critique of mass consumerist culture. Here's a way to think about it. In 1976, a book was written called The Tourist, a new theory of the leisure class, in which author Dean McCannell describes a paradox in the upper class's search for authenticity. McCannell distinguishes between the back and front of an attraction. The front is what's on display, like the dining area of a restaurant or the stage of a theater. The back would be the kitchen or backstage, an area that reveals that the maintenance of the front, the illusion, requires a messy, unvarnished truth. The leisure class is looking for the back, real people in developing countries living real lives. However, paradoxically, this demand for raw reality creates a market for its simulation, a world of experiences staged to look authentic in order to cater to the rich tourist demand. This is an example of how, when everything is commodified, reality itself can decay. Bateman's world is one in which there is no back, just an endless succession of fronts. Just as the leisure class tourist gets lost in a maze of simulations in search of reality, Patrick's efforts at authenticity lead him to a hyperreal abyss of madness. And this complete untethering from reality is most pronounced in the film's resolution, or lack thereof. But first, we have to acknowledge the other allusion to Dostoevsky, this time to his most famous novel, Crime and Punishment. The book is about a student Raskolnikov who, bewitched by similar ideas as the underground man, murders a woman for pragmatic reasons. He's pursued by a savvy detective, Porfiry Petrovich, and ultimately confesses, repents, and embraces a spiritual rebirth. In American Psycho, Porfiry Petrovich is echoed in Willem Dafoe's Donald Kimball, a detective who seems to suspect Patrick.
Huey Lewis in the news. Great stuff. I just bought it on my way here. You heard it?
But ultimately can't quite pin the crime on him. Like Raskolnikov, Patrick confesses, but it does not bring redemption, it brings nothing.
His confession has meant nothing.
Any genuine moral or spiritual redemption like Raskolnikov's would rely on a back, a domain where truth and consequence reside, but here, no such place exists. There is no accountability or redemption, as the distinction between truth and artifice has collapsed. Paul Allen is alive in London
because I had dinner with Paul Allen twice in London.
Because he only ever amounted to an empty suit anyway, and Pat's murders have been literally painted over, dismissed as inconsequential in the face of flashy real estate deals. Do we leave the film questioning the reality of Bateman's actions, or that it doesn't matter, since nothing of substance can happen in a world of only fronts?
Where did you get that overnight bag?
But maybe one can't help but feel a bit of sympathy for Patrick, as the ideological tensions of his era pull him in contradictory directions. On the one hand, Patrick wants to conform.
Because I want to fit in.
But on the other, he's driven by an insatiable hunger to distinguish himself. After all, he kills Paul Allen because he's the one guy who can get a table at Dorsia.
We should have gone to Dorsia. I could have gotten us a table.
Perhaps Bateman represents a dissonance at the heart of the neoliberal era. It creates conformity via mass culture, but within this same culture, authenticity is the paramount moral imperative. Like the underground man who was defined by contradictions, the cultural diagnosis that Bateman represents is similarly a cluster of contradictions. His is a world defined by impenetrable artifice where, paradoxically, one is tormented by the injunction to strip away the facade and find something genuine. That would drive anyone psycho. Hey y'all, thanks for watching. Don't forget to get yourself some Raycon everyday earbuds at buyraycon.com/Bauer for 20 to 50% off site-wide. Hope y'all are having a great autumn, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.